Hello and welcome back to the channel, and in this video I am going to talk politics. Specifically, I'm going to talk about the recent news of Sue Gray accepting the job offer, well I don't know if she's yet accepted, but being offered the job of Chief of Staff for Keir Starmer. So for anyone not particularly following UK politics, Sue Gray was a senior civil servant in the government, and she became famous because she was the one that had to write the report into Boris Johnson's partying during COVID lockdown. As a consequence of that particular report, she exposed extremely poor leadership, a whole host of things that should not have been happening at the heart of government during that time. And this was not the thing that brought Boris Johnson down, but it was one of the many things that did pile on to the pressure onto him, and that which eventually caused his downfall. So despite being a civil servant, Sue Gray was very much seen as someone that was part of that process. Now the reason why she was part of that process is because she was seen as independent. And for anyone again not particularly familiar with how British political system works, the civil service are meant to be politically neutral and independent. I say meant to be because the reality is that has been significantly undermined over the years, and Boris Johnson himself very significantly undermined that. So if you look across various different government departments, you will see public government messaging, public action statement, things that civil servants should not be doing if they are genuinely politically neutral. So there's a problem there. So back to the political scandal that is worth commenting on, because I think it's worth commenting on, because there's an important dimension to this that I don't think the media has covered. Whether they have done so willfully or whether they have not covered it through ignorance is an open question. But I'll come back to that. So let's first identify what particularly is the problem. What's perhaps the scandal of Sue Gray taking up this appointment? Well, the argument goes is that she was at government, she an influential person at government. She is supposedly talked about as somebody of significant worth and of significant integrity. So, in other words, a proper civil servant who's competent and politically neutral. The fact that Keir Starmer has now offered her a job inside the Labour Party to be the Chief of Staff does create that question of, is she genuinely politically neutral? Now, my personal opinion is this is very much shutting the door after the horse is bolted. The civil service isn't already neutral; it's been fatally compromised in many respects. And in fact, my personal opinion as well is that the head of the civil service, Simon Case, himself is a politically compromised individual. He was appointed there by Boris Johnson not because not for good governance. He's not there to make sure that government functions well. He's there to serve the desires of the Conservative Party. That is my personal opinion. So as a civil servant, he's already failing in his duties, and this has been exposed on numerous occasions through numerous scandals, mainly under Boris Johnson. So it seems somewhat hypocritical for members of the Conservative Party to attack Sue Gray and the Labour Party for a far from particularly egregious non-adherence to the rule of political neutrality, considering all the things they have done. But notwithstanding all of that, there is indeed an argument to say that for any political party to pretty much headhunt senior civil servants does throw up viable questions about their independence and their neutrality. Let's flip this the other way. Sue Gray, and both Labour and Conservative politicians who knew her said this at the time, pretty much unanimously, is that she was seen as an individual that commanded considerable respect and had considerable integrity. There are some interesting rumours about her past career in the civil service, which I won't voice. But either way, she's been around for a long time. She is an influential civil servant and she has a reputation to match. And we can make the argument that perhaps she was pulled into the whole Partygate scandal, did her duty, which was investigate the matters within the bounds of the remit that she was set, and produced a report. And that report was pretty critical of a lot of leadership failures. And yet, despite all that, the only people that were punished were the lower level people in number 10. I find it quite surprising that the head of number 10, Simon Case specifically, himself wasn't forced to resign, even though the Sue Gray report exposed significant leadership failings, which should pretty much code for you've screwed up, or you're a terrible person, a terrible manager in terms of managing this organisation. Yet he's still there. So looking at why Sue Gray might take up an appointment from Labour, you can make the case that she had decided she'd had enough of being part of that system, being part of that process, and that she wanted out. And that Keir Starmer, on hearing that she was leaving, and knowing her worth, shall we say, decided to make a job offer to help him when he becomes Prime Minister, whenever the general election turns around, working upon that assumption. He wants a competent individual with integrity to help him and his cabinet step into government and run it reasonably effectively from the beginning. That is the role that Sue Gray plays. But there's another dimension to this that I think hasn't been talked about, which is I think Sue Gray has a little bit of linkage with some of the security services stuff that hasn't been openly talked about, but she's also an experienced civil servant with integrity. She knows where the skeletons are buried. She's seen the corruption in the system, and she's seeing what bad government looks like, because of course she had to do a report on it. So now people who regularly follow this channel will know that I've voiced surprise that Keir Starmer has not made more of his credentials as a public prosecutor, and has not gone so far as to say that one of the priorities of his government will be to stamp on corruption and ineptitude at the heart of government. And this is an argument he could make. This is one that you would see as being a winning argument with the electorate. They would look at his background, they would look at that stated aim, and they would put the two together, and people would be, whether on the Labour or Conservative side of the political spectrum, they would be supportive of that goal, who likes corrupt and incompetent government. So what I think Keir Starmer is doing is quietly positioning himself for that, and Sue Gray is part of that strategy. She is an individual that can help him to deliver that very unstated policy aim. So when it comes to looking at why the Conservative MPs are making so much noise about something that really isn't particularly newsworthy, quite frankly, I don't think it is because they're questioning the integrity of the civil service. They know the civil service is not politically neutral and its integrity has been shot, mainly by them. But I think what they know, really, is that Sue Gray knows where the skeletons are, she knows where the bodies are buried, and that by poaching her, Keir Starmer is sending perhaps a subtle political message that when he becomes Prime Minister, she is going to go in and help him clean house. And there will be casualties of cleaning house. All those compromised civil servants will be shown the door. All the politicians that will be complicit in whatever has been going on will find all their dirty little secrets perhaps exposed, to public scrutiny. So that is what I think is perhaps underneath all of this. is that Sue Gray quite possibly represents, what does she represent? She represents an unspoken policy aim of the Labour Party, which is because they know they've got a big task. They know that for them to deliver their policy objectives, they need a functioning government. And right now, whatever anyone may want to say, whether in favour or against Brexit or in favour or against the Conservative Party, there isn't a particularly functioning government. And there's no point really blaming the civil servant for it, which is not to say they're blameless, but there's just no point blaming them. Leadership starts from the top. And if the top of government is completely dysfunctional, then you can hardly be surprised that all the organisations sitting underneath that are hardly going to be able to perform particularly well either. So this is, I think, the hidden agenda. This is what I think Sue Gray represents, and this is why I think a lot of noise is being made about her appointment when really there isn't that much to talk about, in all honesty. So that is my take on this particular scenario and why the media are making this into a story. And I think it would be very interesting to see how this pans out and whether I am correct and Sue Gray really does help Starmer deliver this particular agenda, or even whether perhaps Starmer, when he eventually does get round to launching the Labour manifesto, whether in there will be something about good governance, stamping on corruption and so on and so forth. And this appointment, I think, would very much feed into that policy aim. So I hope you found this small little insight interesting and helpful. Please do like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing people's viewpoints on this below.